Step outdoors without fear and gain a sense of independence with tips, interviews, and information from blind outdoors enthusiast Lawrence Gunther.
I love skiing. Every time I do it, I have this sense of accomplishment. I don't see what's in front of me.
Real stories, alternative lifestyles.
As long as you can put one foot in front of the other or one hand in front of the other, you can make your way up.
Outdoors with Lawrence Gunther, Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio.
This is an AMI podcast.
I'm Dave Brown, and this is a podcast version of AMI's morning show, Now with Dave Brown. Catch the live broadcasts weekdays from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and AMI TV. Welcome back. It's Now with Dave Brown on AMI. On this edition of AMI at the Movies, we're going to be talking about the Netflix miniseries Behind Her Eyes. Let's give ourselves a listen to the trailer.
I'm Louise, your secretary.
It's nice to meet you.
Based on the best-selling novel.
I just moved to the area.
David's kind and generous. I work for your husband.
You work with David? Small world.
Adele seems perfect.
Louise and Adele jog.
They're both happier with me than they are with each other.
David and Louise kiss.
Shy.
What about your wife?
Is it happening again, David?
What are you talking about?
You know what I mean.
Adele glares.
We all like to think we're in control of our own destiny. So much of our lives are shaped by other people.
You need to learn to control your dreams, Louise. You and me, we're special.
Ooh, moody and broody. Our film reviewer, Amy Amanti, is here now to share her thoughts on the series. Hey, good morning, Amy.
Good morning, Dave Brown. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. So unlike a lot of trailers, Amy, that doesn't really describe what Behind Her Eyes is about. So give us the synopsis.
All right. So we've been introduced to a couple of the characters. So this story follows Louise, who single mother, and she embarks on an affair with her boss, who's a psychologist, Dr. David, and she randomly meets him at a bar. It's kind of one of those where you meet somebody and you don't exchange a name, and then the next day she goes to work and he's the new doctor in town kind of thing. So she discovers also that he is married to wife Adele. And Adele at the same time kind of befriends Louise. So there's a relationship between Louise and Dr. David, and a relationship between Adele and Louise, a friendship. And of course, David and don't know. And you're watching these characters go through this really odd kind of relationship and navigating through. You're like, something's not quite right here with the wife. And so that leads us to a ... of this mystery. Something's quite right with the wife. And of course, the husband is a psychologist, so you wonder, why doesn't he have the skills to cope with, describe in the synopsis is his wife lives with mental illness. But does she is the question.
Okay. So who are the actors, and did any performance stand out to you?
Yeah, so they're fantastic. I wasn't really familiar with any of them. This is a BBC production. So Eve Hewson is the wife Adele, Tom Bateman is Dr. David, Simona Brown is Louise, and Rob Hoyle is another character named Robert, who becomes very instrumental. He's best friends with Adele as they sort of grow up in their 20s in a mental institution together, and becomes quite a paramount character as the plot unfolds.
So, Amy, the series is labeled as a thriller, and some critics have said it's a little bit dull. So what do you think about that critique, and did the writing capture the thrillerness of this?
Yeah, when I think of car chases, I think of action-packed type productions. I don't necessarily think about sort of this day-to-day life type thriller stuff. So I'm not even sure that I would categorize it as The writing is really good, but what happens with good writing is you actually need better actors than writers to pull it off, because there's so many choices that can be made. And so I think all around it did a really good job. There are some moments where it lags just a little bit, but there's enough content there where you're like, okay, wait a second, there's just something odd and I can't put my finger on it. And that was enough for me to go, okay, I got to see the next one. I just got to know. So that was enough for me to just keep clicking through the episodes.
Yeah, I wonder if people get a little bit loose with that definition of thriller, because a lot of times it's about, is there a central question? And it can be packaged in a lot of different ways. It doesn't always need to be dark and ominous. It doesn't always need to be high-speed action. But what's the central mystery? What's the central question? You know, even a show like Mad Men, the first season is all about who is Don Draper. That's the central question. Yeah. It's not a thriller, but there are thrilling moments as you're like, I need to learn who Don Draper is. So how was the audio description in this one?
The audio description is super necessary, and I'll give you an example. There's in such an interesting way. I mean, it's always necessary, right? I say that all the time. But what happens in this one is get into the element of, and I don't want to. There's like a big, huge spoiler at the end of this.
Yeah, no spoilers. No spoilers. No spoilers.
I'm trying to stay away. But there are some moments where the audio description becomes super integral, and you don't know why. Because as a listener, you're like, why would they choose to describe that to me? You know, and how does it with what I'm witnessing right now? So I actually watched the series twice. And when I watched it back, I was like, oh, okay, they're laying the breadcrumbs for what comes at the end. And you don't, as you know, as a watcher and a listener, you don't know what's coming at the end. And so it's one of those things. It's almost like the Easter eggs that we talk about. What's hidden in this episode or in these episodes as they unfold, the that kind of gives me that little spidey sense as to what could possibly happen. And so without that, I've been completely lost. Although with it, in some of those moments, I was like, why are they describing this? But it all unveils itself at the end.
I've got a sort of follow-up question to that. Do they describe a lot of things that are not integral as a way to make sure they're not overly Easter egging you?
I would say not. I'd say there's a good balance.
Okay.
Because the stuff that was described, again, while in the moment, you're like, why would they describe, for example, I think, and it's not a spoiler alert, but I think it's a little bit like a light pattern, you know, kind of like an orby light pattern. And you're like, well, why would they describe to me what this light pattern is? Like, how does that, you know, fit in with a woman who's standing in her kitchen? And so then it's not until the end where you're like, oh, okay, because it becomes really central to what happens at the end. And then you're like, okay, so they've laid the breadcrumbs. So they did a really good job, I think, of balancing the two.
Little foreshadowing, little Chekhov's gun. That's what I'm talking about. Amy, out of 10, how do you rate it?
You know, Mr. Brown, I actually gave this one a 10 because I just think that I haven't seen a movie in such a long time, or a series or anything, that I haven't been like, you know what, I could be writing this because the next thing that's going to happen is X, and then the next thing that's going to happen is Y, and then we're going to get to Z, and I have wasted my time watching this because I could have written it myself. And oftentimes we watch things like that, right? You're like, I'm writing the plot as the show goes around. It's too predictable. This was not predictable, and it's not until you get to the last 2 episodes where you're like, wait, what? What are they telling me? So for the payoff at the end of it, I would say give it a try. And then I would say, if you're using the description, watch it again. Because as they describe sort of characters' reactions to things, it's like, oh, that's why they reacted that way. And you don't know that until the mystery is revealed. So.
Love that. And I think that goes back to the pace thing too, right? That maybe some folks critiqued it and said, oh, it's a little bit slow, it's a little bit dull. Sometimes you accept that in a series if the payoff is great. And it sounds like the payoff here made it worthwhile.
For me, the payoff was unexpected. You know, I'm sure that there's going to be discussions about whether it's satisfactory to the end. There's always discussions about that. But I think for the 6 episodes or whatever miniseries, that it was absolutely worth watching. And in fact, I watched it twice, right? So for me, I thought, yeah, it was totally worth it.
Hey, Amy, thank you for this.
Thank you.
That is Amy Manti, our film reviewer in Vancouver, BC. Remember, she is the host of the show Accessing Art with Amy, which you can find on all major podcast platforms. And I do want to note here, this Behind Her Eyes series on Netflix, it is rated MA for mature audiences. So I don't even know if I'm allowed to watch that. You've been listening to Now with Dave Brown. Hit the subscribe button on any podcast platform and leave us a rating and a review.